vibes I'm going off of, basically. But I don't know who the pink-skinned monster creature thing is. I'm sure we'll find out again along the way. Prologue. Viv buried her greatsword in the Scalvet's skull. With a meaty crunch, black blood thrummed in her hands, and her muscular arms strained as it tore it back and out in a spray of gore. The Scalvet Queen gave a long, vibrating moan, and then thundered to the stone in a heap. With a sigh, Viv slumped to her knees. The persistent twinge in her lower back flared up, and she dug in the knuckles of one huge hand to chase it away. Wiping sweat and blood from her face, she stared down at the dead queen. Cheers and shouts echoed from behind her. She leans closer. Yes, it was right. It was right above the navel cavity. The beast's head was twice as wide as she was, all improbable teeth and uncountable eyes, with a huge underslung jaw, and in the middle the fleshy seam she'd read about. Jamming her fingers into the fold, she pried it open. A sickly golden light spilled out. Viv slid her whole hand into the pocket of flesh, curled her fist around a faceted organic lump and yanked. It came free with a fibrous ripping sound. Fennis moved to stand behind her. She could smell his perfume. Is that it then? He asked, only a little interested. Yep, Viv groaned as she hoisted herself to her feet, using black blood as a crutch. Without bothering to clean the stone, she stuffed it into her pouch on her bandolier and propped the great sword on her shoulder. And that's truly all you want? Finnis squinted up at her. His long, beautiful face was amused. He gestured at the walls of the cavern where the Scalvet Queen had entombed untold wealth within sheets of hardened saliva. Wagons, chests, and the bones of horses and men hung suspended amidst gold, silver, and gemstones, the shiny castaways of centuries. Yep, she said again, we're square. The rest of the party approached. Rune, Travis, and little Galena brought with them the exhausted but exultant chatter of the victorious. Rune combed muck from his beard. Galena sheathed her swords, and Travis glided behind them both. Tall and watchful, they were a good crew. Viv turned away and strolled towards the cavern's entrance, where dim light still filtered through. Scalvert stone afire draws the ring of fortune, aspect of heart's desire. Viv carefully tucked it away again, exchanging it for the device she'd purchased a week before from the foremast scholar in Arvine, a witching rod. A small wooden spindle was wrapped in copper thread, which covered the runes inscribed along its length. A wishbone of fire was fitted over the top and into the groove as it spun freely. She held it in her fist, feeling the copper thread absorb the warmth of her palm. The spindle gave a barely perceptible tug. At least she was fairly certain it was a tug. During the foremast's demonstration, there had been a stronger pull. Viv pushed down the sudden thought that it had all been a parlour trick. As a rule, folks with a fixed address avoided swindling an orc twice their height, who could snap a wrist if they shook hands too firmly. She took a deep breath and strode into Foom, with the witching rod behind her. Foom's wakeful noises rose as she moved farther into the city. At the outskirts, the buildings had been mostly wooden, with some riverstone foundations intercepted. The deeper she ventured, the more stone prevailed, as though the city had calcified as it aged. Muddy dirt gave way to a smattering of storm lanes, then cobbles near the city's core. Temples and taverns hooded around squares featuring statues of people who probably used to be important. Any doubt that the witching rod had evaporated? It definitely pulled now like a living thing, brief twitches growing into insistent tugs. Her research hadn't been in vain. Ley lines were clearly threaded beneath the city, powerful avenues of formic energy. Scholars debated whether they grow where people settled or gathered folk near like warmth in winter. What mattered to Viv was that they were here. Finding a potent ley line was only the start, of course. The little wishbone of ashwood twitched left and right, tugging one way for a time before reversing and pulling like a fish on a hook in another direction. After a while, she didn't have to look at it. The feel of it was enough, and Viv paid more attention to the building she passed. The device ushered her down the major thoroughfares, through the squiggling alleys that stitched them together, past blacksmiths and hotels, and markets and inns. There were a few people her height on the streets, and she never found herself crowded. Black blood tended to have that effect. Passed through all the layers of smell that made up a city, baking bread and waking horses, and wet store and hot metal and floral perfume and old shit. The same smells you found in any city, but underneath them the morning scent of the river. Sometimes between the buildings she could see the blades of the water wheel at the flour mill. Viv let the rod lead her where it wanted. A few times the tug was so strong she stopped and inspected the buildings nearby, but disappointed she continued onward. The rod would resist for a while until it seemed to give up, finding a new direction in which to surge. At last, when it yanked hard, she came to a semi-dazed stop and found what she needed. Not on the high street, that would have been too much to hope for, but it was only one removed. Kerosene street lamps dotted the length, extinguished now, and like as not, wouldn't be knife there after dark. The buildings on Redstone showed their age, but the roof seemed in good repair. All man's library. There were two large iron-bound wooden doors, but they were ajar and the crossbeam was leaning against the wall nearby. Another smaller-sized oak door was amusingly padlocked to the left of it. Viv tucked her head in for a look. The light filtered from a hole in the roof above, and a handful of clay shingles lay shattered. Viv ducked her head in for a look. Light filtered from a hole in the roof above, and a handful of clay shingles lay shattered across the broad alleyway leading between 6-horse stalls. A ladder of dubious sturdiness led to a loft, and to the left, a small office with a back room. The sour smell of mouldering hay came from the trough at the back. Dust swirled in beams of light as though it never settled. It was as perfect as she could hope for. She took the witching rod away. When she re-emerged into the growing traffic of the street, she spied a knobbly old woman sweeping the stoop across the way. Viv was pretty sure she'd been sweeping since her arrival, the threshold, no doubt sparkling at this point, but she continued to attack it with determination, shooting Viv a surreptitious look every other second. Viv strode across the street. The woman had the good grace to appear surprised, mustering something approaching. A smile as she did. "Do you know who owns this place?" asked Viv, pointing back to the library. The woman was less than half her height and had to crane to make eye contact. Her eyes disappeared as she compressed her face into a considering tangle of wrinkles. The library. Yep. Well, she dragged the word out thoughtfully, but Viv could tell there was nothing wrong with her memory. That's old Ansem, if I recollect properly. Never had much of a head for business, that man. Not for trade, no husband's work. Neither to hear his old lady tell it. Viv didn't miss the woman's suggestive pump of the eyebrow. Not parking. Nope. 'Twas too cheap to change the sign when he bought it. Viv's smile was amused, her lower fangs prominent. "Any ideas where I can find him?" "Couldn't say for certain, but I imagine attending to the only work he never failed at." She tipped her free hand, bringing an imaginary tankard to her lips. "If you really want to find him, I try the places on Rawborn Alley. Head about 6 over," she gestured to the south. "At this time of morning? Oh, this business he's serious about." "Thanks, miss." "Oh, miss, is it?" cackled the woman. You can call me Lainey. You planning to be my new neighbour?" She gives an in. She made a give it over motion. Liv said Lainey, nodding. "I guess we'll see on whether he's as bad as business as I guess we'll see. Depends on whether he's as bad a businessman as you say." The old woman was still laughing as Viv left for Rawborn Alley. No matter what Lainey said, Viv didn't really expect to find the much maligned Ansem at this time of day. She figured she'd ask after him in any swill joint with an open door. Once she knew his haunts, track him down after the day wore on. Turned out she only needed 3 stops before she found him in residence. The tavern keep looked her up and down after she asked, raising his eyebrows pointedly at Blackblood's hilt over her shoulder. "No trouble from me, just business," she said evenly. She tried to look less imposing. Apparently satisfied that she wasn't spoiling for a fight, he cocked a thumb at the corner and went back to swabbing the grime off the bar top into new and more interesting locations. As Viv approached the table, she got the overwhelming impression that she was entering the den of some elderly woodland beast. sat anywhere, leaning black blood against the back of the chair. And truth be told, she wasn't really accustomed to asking permission. Ansem stared at her over puffy lower lids, not hostile but wary. The tankard sat between him. A tankard sat before him, nearly empty. Viv caught the tavern keeper's attention and gestured at it, and Ansem brightened considerably. Much obliged, he had muttered. I hear you hold the old livery on Redstone, that true? Asked Viv. Ansem allowed that he did. I'm looking to buy, she said, and have a feeling you might be looking to sell. Ansem seemed surprised, but only briefly. His gaze sharpened, and while he might not have had a bed for business, Viv was pretty sure he had one for haggling. Maybe, he rumbled, but that's some prime real estate. Prime, I've had offers before, but most of them don't see past the place to really appreciate the value of the location. That is to say, they underbid. At this point, the tavern keep swapped his tankard for a fresh one, and Ansem visibly warmed to his subject. So yes, so many embarrassing offers, I have to warn you. I know what that lot is worth, and I can't see myself selling to anyone but a serious businesswoman, he amended. Viv flashed her toothy and amused grin, thinking of lady. Well, Ansem, there's all kinds of business. Very conscious of black blood leaning behind her, she thought of how easy her old business would have made this negotiation. But I can say for sure that when I do business of any kind, I'm always serious. She reached for her satchel, removed the purse of platinum chits, and hefted it. Withdrawing just one, she held it between her thumb and forefinger, inspecting it, letting it catch the light. Platinum was a currency hardly ever seen in a place like this, and she'd need to exchange it for lower denominations soon. But she'd wanted to keep some on hand for just this sort of moment. Ansem's eyes widened. Oh, serious? Yes, serious indeed. He took a long pull of his beard to cover his surprise. Sly dog, Viv thought, trying not to smirk. As one serious business person to another, I don't want to waste your time. Viv leaned on an elbow and slid 8 platinum chits across the table. That's probably 80 gold sovereign. I think that covers the value of the lot. I'm sure we can agree that the building is a loss, and I think the odds of another businesswoman tracking you down to pay cash on the barrelhead is vanishing. She held his gaze. He still had the tankard to his mouth, but wasn't swallowing. Viv began to withdraw the chits, and he hurriedly reached out, pulling up short before touching her much larger hand. She raised her eyebrows. I can see you've got a keen eye for value, Ansem blinked rapidly. I do. If you want to take a moment this morning to bring the deed, and I'll sign it over. I'll wait here, but I won't wait any longer than noon. Turned out the old badger was a lot nimbler than he looked. As Viv made her mark on the deed and pocketed the keys, Ansem scooped the platinum into his purse, looking relieved the deal was complete. So, I didn't figure you to be interested in livery work, he ventured. It was common knowledge that horses didn't like orcs much. I'm not. I'm opening a coffee shop. Ansem looked nonplussed. But why would you buy a horse stable for that? Viv didn't answer for a moment, but then she stared hard at him. Things don't have to stay as what they started out as. She folded the deed and tucked it into her satchel. As she left, Ansem hollered after her, "Oh, and hey, what in the 8 hells is coffee?" Viv had 3 more stops to make before returning to the As she stamped the wax seal, the woman had to take the address twice. She was so flustered at seeing an orc in the building. I'm looking for a locksmith. Know of anyone reputable? The gnome's mouth hung open for a moment longer, but she recovered herself and flipped through a directory behind the counter. Mark Evans' Sons, 287 Mason's Lane. She gave some sketchy directions. Viv thanked her and then left. Mark Evans' Sons was there, as advertised. A silver and 3 coppers lighter, she left with an enormous and quite heavy strong box under one muscular arm. Back at Parkin's library, as the sun set, Viv unlocked the office door, rebarred the stable doors, and hauled the strong box behind an L-shaped counter in the office. She stored the deed and her funds inside, locked it, and strung the key around her neck. After some testing with her feet and fingertips, she found a loose flagstone in the main pathway behind the stalls, and flexing the mightily levered it up and out. She scooped earth from beneath and then carefully placed the scalfed stone in the hollow. Covering it with dirt, she replaced the flagstone and took a stiff and shedding stable broom to the area to ensure it looked undisturbed. She stared down at it for a few moments, all of her hopes centred on this small stone, buried in a secret heart in Parkin's library. No, not a library anymore. This place was Viv's. She looked around. Her place. Not a temporary stop or a spot to sling her bedroll for one night. Hers. The brisk evening air swirled through the hole in this roof, so for tonight at least, it would probably feel like any other night under the stars. Viv glanced up at the loft and the ladder leading to it. She tested one of the lower rungs with her foot, and it shattered like balsa. She snorted, unstrapped black blood, and with both hands tossed it into the loft, startling a bunch of pigeons that escaped through the roof. Gazing after it for a moment, she then unfurled her bedroll. There'd certainly be no campfire, and there were no lanterns to speak of, but that was all right. In the dimming light, she surveyed the interior amidst the horse apples of antiquity and the dust of neglect. She didn't know much about buildings, but it was clear that this one needed an unbelievable amount of work. But at the end of it, something she built up rather than cut down. It was ridiculous, of course, a coffee shop in a city where nobody even knew what coffee was. Until 6 months ago, she'd never heard of it, never smelled or tasted it. On the face of it, the whole endeavour was ludicrous. She smiled in the dark. When at last she lay back on her bedroll, she started to list her tasks for the next day, but didn't make it past the 3rd. She slept like the dead. So I think we'll leave it there for tonight. I really hope you've enjoyed it. I'm really enjoying this book so far. It definitely gives me that cozy fantasy vibes. I think Viv is so sweet, and I'm really excited to see where we go with the coffee shop. I'm hoping we hear a little bit more about the adventures she